ArtCenter South Florida. For those of you who may not know who we are and what we do, we're a nonprofit arts organization. That's dedicated to supporting artists, cultural practitioners, and actually Miami's art community at large. And we do this through a number of initiatives. We do this through residency programs like our studio residencies, through international exchanges, paid fellowships, through direct support like grants and production funds for artists and curators to realize projects. But we also do it by organizing programs like this, where we put together exhibitions with compelling artists, leading scholars, great curators, and we do talks, lectures, and seminars. So I want to thank you guys all for coming here and joining us for this one. I want to take this opportunity to actually plug an upcoming application deadline that we have. On Monday, we are receiving the last of our applications for our Art and Public Life residency. It's a one-year opportunity for an artist to be embedded in city government to deal with actually some of the things we'll be talking about today, which is sea level rise and resiliency here in Miami Beach. And if you want to know what we're up to, of course, please join our mailing list, which are on little old school clipboards throughout the building. It's my pleasure to be here with you guys today with A.S.T, the Alliance of the Southern Triangle, to talk about their practice and, of course, the exhibition Intertidal, which, if you haven't had a brief opportunity to walk through, it's now up and going. Before we get started, it would be remiss for me not to thank my dear colleagues here at ArtCenter who have literally worked on every single corner of this exhibition, from this program to every painted corner in there, so thank you. Thank you, Gustavo Matamoros and the audio tech, for once again allowing us to take over your space. And of course, I want to thank you, A.S.T, for being so generous with your practice, with your time, and for sharing the space of thinking and doing with me specifically, actually, and with all of you guys today. For those of you who don't know, A.S.T is a working group of artists, architects, and a curator consisting of Diane Bauer, Felice Groden, Patricia Margarita Hernandez, and Elite Cadan. They've presented artwork, research, seminars, and lectures, among other forms, at History Miami, the Schmidt Center Gallery in Boca Raton, Multimedia Cultural Center Split in Croatia, and the Sharjah Biennial, as well as drawing and design work for Art Papers and the Miami Rail, which you guys have a forthcoming issue, actually, that you've been working on with the Miami Rail. So we're going to talk here for 45 minutes, and then I'm going to open it for you guys. So I'm really hoping that you prep some questions up and find out what you want to know from these talented group of people today. I think the easiest place to start with is actually with your collaborative. I think over the course of the past few months watching you guys work, it's been a real highlight to see how your different skills and your backgrounds really contribute to your practice. And that you actually are a very unique group of people, right? You're like I said, you're architects, you're artists, you're curators. So I kind of want to know how you came together, or for everyone to know how you came together, what each of those experiences actually contribute to the collective, and what continues to drive you all as this. And in answering this, there's one thing that I really wanted you to address, which is kind of why Miami plays such a key part in your practice.
I'll start. Okay. We met in 2015 at what was then Cannonball, which was, I actually don't know the lineage between ArtCenter and Cannonball, but I know there's links. But so there was a semester-long workshop thinking about global cities and thinking about Miami in particular. And so we met in this context and thinking about, Miami specific with regards to sea level rise, but also just how it functions and how it is a city that is as much facing south as sort of a southern point for the U.S. I'm the one that's not actually based in Miami. I've never lived in Miami. So I was sort of coming into Miami very much as an outsider, and my personal understanding of Miami was very limited. And I learned a huge amount myself about Miami through doing this sort of semester-long workshop with these guys. And I think it was through that we sort of realized we had some really core interests that overlapped. I mean, urban planning and architecture, certainly one of them. Just for the record, these two guys are the architects. I studied architecture and can't seem to shake it from being an integral part of my practice as an artist. And so, I mean, this is some of the things that we have consistently, interests that we have consistent. I mean, I could go on about the why Miami, but I don't know if any of you guys want to say anything about sort of how we started in particular.
I think you summed it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should I go on about why Miami? Okay. I mean, in a way, I'm probably the least appropriate person to talk about why Miami, because I'm the one that doesn't live here. But maybe that is maybe appropriate too, because I mean, I think from the outside, the picture of Miami is very like you know, place where people go on vacation and like the flamingo thing and, you know, like that whole shtick, right? Like that. This is sort of, and then once you get here, you realize it's a completely different city, and it is already at the forefront of sea level rise. I mean, with the king tides. I mean, you guys, I should hand over because I have yet to experience the king tides, but I think probably everyone in this room has firsthand experience of it.
I mean, it's funny, just pick up on the sort of local vantage point. I live in a building that actually was designed by, who's a famous architect? Thank you. That guy, Morris Lapidus. And I think it was like a bread and butter project. But basically what's interesting about where I live is the garage is underground. So a few years ago, everyone who had parking spots in this garage lost their cars because it became kind of routine that this garage would flood. And so, you know, it's become a reality now. You know, it's the new norm. It's not a rumor or speculation anymore that this is a reality of where we live. So you've got, I mean, you know, we all know this from being here, that we live with rising tides. But then in conjunction with some of the things we were discussing in this class that we took together, we have these other flows. You know, we have the flow of water, but then we have these other kind of financial, kind of real estate kind of flows, which has to do with speculation and, of course, money. And, of course, people. So all of, you know, we're kind of hovering between these two domains that are quite pressured. And I think that drove a particular interest, I think, to develop a response to these kinds of pressures.
But on that, I guess, and given that you've chosen the particular field of art in order to do this, and I mean, if we're thinking about climate change and sea level rise, which are generally intractable, right? What we feel like are kind of intractable or complex issues about climate, like why the field of art specifically to talk about this?
I think I can say something about that. I think art is a place where multiple things can happen and multiple narratives can happen. And what we do is we research and take facts and then speculate. So then when we talk about speculation, it's like it's a narrative. It's a storyline that we create. So rather than something it being totally based, it's based in reality, yet we take it somewhere else. Like, for example, the idea of communication that is in the work Intertidal that you guys will see when you go in. We're talking about communication across time. And so that means the future. So thinking about the future and where we will be in the next 30 to 50 to 100 years. So that is where we kind of make a nice narrative, or not so nice.
I mean, you can do things in art that you can't do even in architecture, you know, because of lots of reasons, regulations and that sort of thing. But I think there's a purported freedom within art, which, and I say purported because I don't know if it's in fact really true, but in a way you can take that claim that art sort of understands itself to be, or the field of art to be a place of freedom that you can do anything with, and kind of taking that claim to task and sort of being like, okay, so if we can do anything because it's art, it means we can talk to the city engineer and we can make an exhibition, and these are both equally valid as an art practice, and both very important as what an art practice needs to now be.
And so it becomes I think there's twofold. Like one way we're thinking of the art space. One way thinking of the art space and speculation as a certain kind of a freedom to generate new narratives, you know, that might be constrained when we have to bring them down to the ground. So it's to generate new narratives, but I think it's also then to bring people with us. So there's the issue of communication and how we start to communicate a message about climate change or about whatever these new uncertainties are, that generating new narratives in order to create, to create a kind of, like cultural, I think you called it cultural memories or cultural stories that will help us in this moment, you know, and move through it. So
Also to establish new norms, really. I mean, I think this is like things are new,
Right.
sort of kind of unthought consensuses.
Yeah, and there's also, I think, new norms through generating new images. And I think that's important, especially in the idea of city development and the way in which Miami gets sold. There's that image that continues to circulate, and I think the use of generating new images to generate new narratives, to generate new norms.
I think there's something here also that, Felice, you had talked about before, which was, I mean, there's something about the messaging, the communication about like new norms and cultural memory that has somewhere in between this idea of public will and propaganda and getting the idea across. So I was wondering, I mean, just to kind of even expand about the space of art in order to kind of talk about these things that are both bigger than us and difficult.
Yeah, I mean, recently we did a workshop through BFI, and we invited this Miami Beach city engineer. We invited a mayor. We invited a water management official. We invited you. But one of the things that came out of it that was really fascinating was that we thought, well, you know what? We're going to help assist them. Art, we're going to be this sort of civic activist kind of role. But what was really interesting is that they said to us, actually, there was a kind of reversal, in fact, that they said, you guys actually probably could communicate better with the public than we can, so that we actually could, in fact, have a kind of leverage within the public will. And, you know, the idea of propaganda is nothing new in art. I mean, this goes back historically. So, you know, the idea then is that, in fact, the role of art could play, as you were elaborate on guys, could elaborate on how we begin to shape public will, which is quite powerful. And so, you know, there is a kind of slip in there in the sense that maybe the public's a little more open and pliable to, you know, in terms of art versus just straight up political activism. You know, I don't know where that line is drawn, but I think it's interesting in that, in fact, it kind of gives art a certain empowerment in this particular role. And one of the things that came out of, I think it was Philip Stoddard, the mayor, who said, you know, I'm the mayor, you know, I respond to public will rather than kind of deploy it, where, you know, we talked a little bit about that kind of response versus reaction sort of approach. And that, you know, the public needs to know, they need to be assisted in a way. And I feel that there's a space here, okay, in regards to what you're talking about.
But I'm in two minds about that stuff, though, because I think, in a way, I think they look to us and think that's what we do, and I don't know if we actually do that. I mean, to a certain extent, we do.
But there's a space. That's
But,
all I'm saying.
but I think in a way, for me, what is more, I think what's more interesting as a practice, or something that keeps my interest better, is actually using art as a way to think about this stuff, because it's not just an issue of we have a solution and this is how we communicate this clear idea of what needs to happen. It's a way of thinking, you know, this is a condition that we are in. I mean, what that we is another question as well. But for the moment, we'll say the we is like the art we. And we're just trying to understand what that is. So in a way, making work to try and understand the new conditions that we're in. And I suppose the hope is that, you know, the work itself becomes a sort of dialogue. So like through the making of the work, you know, we as individuals can come to understand the condition better, but then also through the dialogue that the work makes with an audience.
yeah, you create a collective conscious.
An extra tool of thinking, like an extra tool of thought that isn't just, you know, that isn't just reports or something. It's a way of thinking that isn't just, that is part didactic, but is part something else too.
So I guess on that, I think it's good time to really start getting into Intertidal, the exhibition, all of the elements. You guys will notice we basically are rotating a lot of images around. There are references that either A.S.T has used within their work in the past or as research images, and there's some like images in there of the actual space. The exhibition has a lot of layers, right? It uses architecture, it's drawing, it's video, and it weaves together a lot of these references about urban planning, the future, the past, science fiction, climate change, communication, which you guys mentioned, deep uncertainty. So why the intertidal, right? The intertidal is this area that is at high tide underwater, at low tide above water. It means a lot more here. It references a book by Kim Stanley Robinson, or at least, a particular kind of zone. Can you tell us a little bit more about, what this idea came with specifically with this exhibition?
You wrote the intertitle piece.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, the barnacle.
Barnacle.
Well, I think going to sort of piggybacking on kind of what Diane and I are going back and forth on, which is not to necessarily about, I appreciate that point about it, maybe this isn't a prescriptive practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's still a speculative practice. But the sort of, I guess just understanding of the space of the intertidal, it's a space of flux. It's a space of flux. And we, I think, understand that here, just inherently, which ties into the deep uncertainty that we exist in. And who wants to hear about that, right? So, I mean, but I think the kind of just establishment of this space on many levels, there is the literal zone of the intertidal. I mean, in Stan's book, it's pretty interesting how it's scaled up to actually be part of New York. It was actually based, that particular book was based in New York. But that we exist in a space of flux, and how we address it, really. How does an art practice address it? And so,
I'm just wondering if I should say about the Kim Stanley Robinson,
Yes.
just briefly, because it's from his book. I'm going to get the number wrong. 2140. That's it. And it's about a flooded New York that I think the seas have risen 50 feet, and there's this whole section of New York, which is essentially downtown from, I can't remember, 14th Street down or something, that is this intertidal zone. So it's half the time underwater, half the time above water. And you have lots of buildings that are collapsing, and this sort of within the narrative of the book. And there are many things within it, like property indexes, speculative markets based on property in the intertidal zone. So he's got a whole sort of a whole thread woven into the narrative about how property speculation happens within this zone of half and half. Because you can't actually sell the property in this zone, but you can bet on how long it's going to last or something like this. So this is sort of an essential sort of bit within the narrative of this book about a flooded New York. But I didn't. I just wanted to sort of have that as a little loop, but I didn't.
well, and I'd like to hear from because there was a lot of interesting conversations about this. I mean, in the most micro sense, it's sort of that when you see the tide rise against, say, the piers, right? You see that tide going up and down. So, I mean, what Dee's talking about is, scaling that space up to where we, in fact, live, So, I mean, especially given all the hurricanes we just experienced, the kind of anxiety now, both on our individual lives and on the markets, per se, it goes back to, I guess, Oolite, what you were kind of getting at with how do we write narratives? How do we relate as a culture, as a community, to this situation we're in? Do you want to pick up on that? Or?
No, that was good.
Okay, go ahead.
I did just want to say one thing about this is sort of in reference to something before about Miami specifically, because I think one of the things that we as a group are interested in, we have sort of Miami as a base in a way as like a test case. I mean, in part because Miami has money, so I think globally the world is going to be looking to see what this. Okay, I know you're looking at me with dodgy eyes there, but it has more money than
Fair.
Bangladesh, for example. It has more funds to put into infrastructure than a lot of global cities are going to. So I think looking at Miami as what is Miami going to do? There's a lot of people that have a lot of investment here that aren't going to want to see it sunk in a way that a lot of other global cities can afford to let things sink. Or in a, I mean, that's probably not phrased quite right, but things will sink. So I think globally, Miami is an interesting case because of both where it's geographically situated as well as where it's financially situated. So I just wanted to say that before we moved away from why Miami. So like our focus is Miami, but more as a test case rather than it's sort of this global-local relationship that I think Miami is really central to in this topic particularly.
I think Miami is all over this exhibition. I mean, specifically in the space, there's the idea of the intertidal, even the way that you guys have described it to me, as Miami being in its own kind of already in an intertidal zone, right? It's already both dealing with king tides, but even the fluctuation of flows of capital and movement and things like this already kind of create these flex zones. Let's talk about the space, because you guys worked really hard on all of these aspects. I mean, from the architecture to the details and the references. And I wonder if Elite and Felice, if you can kind of specifically talk us through some of those hidden references that may not be so immediately legible to, you know, us walking through and what people can experience in there.
I'm talking fragments. So I think one of the things that we wanted to, I think, do was make certain that this was an immersive environment that we were trying to create, so that you would be transported, that you would be able to kind of occupy both where you're at, but also kind of at the same time be in this projected speculative kind of space. And I think also then the inside and the outside was kind of important, that you were inside the space, but then you would be part of Lincoln Road, part of the city, and kind of there would be a certain kind of flow and movement through the space. I think also bending the space, like picking up on the curves, picking up on these kind of like urban vernacular of Miami was something that was important to us. Do you want to? Oh, yeah. Well, but is that something you were going to bring up? The control room aspect of it?
I think we should talk about that. I mean, I think when we first started talking about this exhibition, there were so many references to sci-fi films and this idea of the future and how do you create this immersive space. And this idea of the control room kept coming up, right, as this place where, like, you had all of these monitors and people could kind of register what was happening outside, but that you didn't necessarily feel it. And you guys really took that, right? I mean, we took out the actual control room. We were initially going to have one with all of these buttons everywhere, and that clearly wasn't necessary. But how did it kind of continue to play into the space, and why is this idea of like metrics and data and all of this so important to your work? Because there's something there. It's not like a linear narrative that you sit there and you understand what all of those lines mean, but there's data that you guys have been sourcing, and it plays itself out both in the architecture, in the videos, and all of this. So. Yeah, the control room, why? What's so important about these things?
Well, we all have, I don't know, I think we all have slightly different takes on it, but I think it's something that's come up in a lot of the previous works that we've done. There's always been kind of like this cockpit or this control room or this kind of place, not so much as a space that you control the environment, but more one through which, like a navigational interface, something where you read the data, you read the landscape, you read these things that are happening, and you try to find ways through it. So, and I think then also just in relation to some kind of a landscape or an environment, that's kind of the thing that Felice and I were working on, was just what those objects were in the space and how they might somehow riff off of the Venetian islands, or these kind of just like these landscapes, these man-made landscapes of Miami, so that are very controlled, but that are kind of made from the coral reef and kind of whatever the material, the substrate that's there, and so they become this synthetic kind of urbanity or something. So I don't know. That's a take.
But the control room also kind of feeds into the videos a little bit too, right? I mean, because that's the data that kind of becomes a visual interface or the navigational interface, as you're saying, Elite.
I mean, I think with the videos, there's, I mean, the idea, there's lots of ideas thrown into the videos, but one of them is, I think, trying to grapple with, well, as I mentioned before, the sort of conditions that we're in, and by that I mean, like this global condition of living with huge amounts of data about the future, that none of which can you completely hang on to, and you have to sort of pick the best one, and build a future based on that. So I mean, through the video, I mean, this is broadening out from just the control room aspect, but it's, I mean, the thing with the communication and the Claude Shannon and the cybernetics, there's a diagram in the beginning, which is a diagram from Claude Shannon from information theory, and he creates a diagram of how communication happens. And I think my interest around this was like, okay, well, how, like, can this run backwards? Like, it's inherently temporal. Communication goes from now to the future. In a previous, in the Sharjah piece that we did, the piece for the Sharjah Biennale, there was similar questions and similar diagrams, and it was, I think we're thinking through communicating with the future, like how do you get a message to the future? And then I think through the process of doing this exhibition, there was a sense of, okay, well, actually, you're always communicating with the future, like even if it's, 10 seconds in the future, or even if it's sort of the ghosts of 200 years ago, reading books, they were written 200 years ago, they're communicating, like we're now their future. So like there's always, the communication with the future is sort of inherent in terms of what communication is. But the difficult thing now is how would a future that we're trying to understand communicate with the past, i.e. us? And can this diagram run backwards? Like, how would that happen? And one of the things in the diagram is this idea of noise. So one of the things that the video sort of posits is that communication with the past happens via noise, and that it's through this noise that we construct our myths. It's this message from the future that we construct the myths on which we sort of base how we live, and whether they're right or not. I mean, we were talking about this a bit last night. Like, mythologies are always sort of taking data and making stories from it, and sometimes it's completely off. But I mean, it does. There's no sort of correct correlation between like the data and the story. But this is, in a way, I think what we're trying to do in terms of constructing a future and understanding what cities are going to need to look like, because this is all we have. Is like we have this information coming to us as noise, and we have to make something of it. So I mean, this is sort of the communication line through the video. Is this sort of temporal flipping of trying to not just communicate with the future, but have this sort of back and forth communication with trying to understand what the future will be in order to construct one that functions better.
That message specifically, I mean, this exhibition obviously deals with, the ideas of climate and climate change specifically. But how did those particular references, right, make themselves like apparent in the space? And I think the audio actually also has a lot to
back into the idea of the control room. So when you walk into the space, you're immediately confronted with the video and the sound, and obviously the red of the space. But part of the control room, in particular in films, A Drama and a Strain was one of our major references with the space. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend it. I think it's a 1972 version, because there's a newer one as well. But either way, the control room is always a space, going back to the idea of communication, where people are communicating with each other through in different areas. So the sound plays a part in it first, in being a communication from somewhere else. One of the major components is a Xenakis piece, layered with different sounds on top of it and abstracted to a certain degree. And so that, and there's certain points where you hear icebreakers, and that is important, obviously speaking towards climate change and what's happening with the melting of the glaciers in Antarctica. So kind of bringing that type of geology into the space is something that's important. So that type of communication to the space is important. And then when you look, you have the main video in the front, which is dealing with the didactics of explaining to a certain degree what we're thinking about. To the left of it, which is the west side, which in Florida, and where we're located now, the west is the Everglades. So then you have something like that, imagery bringing it in, and also tying in the Antarctic into that. all of which happens in spurts, somewhat sped up or slowed down. And in that sense, this is visual ideas of visual representations of this type of communication.
Okay, I got thinking about the Arctic and the Antarctic and Miami link. I mean, this is going back again to sort of Miami as like a test case and sort of point for, that the globe is going to be looking at. I mean, I think through all the research that we've been doing around this, something that kept coming up is like you'd be watching something, I watch way too much David Attenborough. So you're watching like David Attenborough sort of in the Arctic, and then the next cut is Miami, and this regular cut of going from either Greenland or the Antarctica, and then cut to Miami, and it's like it's the city exemplifies what the melting of these huge chunks of ice is going to do. So I mean, of course, it's not just Miami that's going to be hit by this, but the sort of the constant link between the Arctic and the tropical regions, and that's sort of something that's very much in the exhibition, is this, Miami as this global node.
Yeah. Also, in terms of the other references that you're bringing in to the videos and into the space, there's just this idea of the interconnectedness of these things, that it's this web of these connections, not necessarily that there's some kind of a causal, direct, situational thing happening, but that there's just this complex web of interconnectedness that we don't maybe know exactly how it's working.
And this is exactly why I think like using art as a way to think is useful. I don't know. I mean, that's sort of how I understand art's job, I guess, is to, because it is not straightforward to understand. In a way, through art, you're able to think about lots of things at the same time in a nonlinear way that sort of other fields that need sort of definitive results at the end of a study. I mean, art does give that space where you can sort of bring these things together and throw things on top of each other and be like, okay, what does that look like? I mean, both literally, what does that look like on a piece of paper, but what does that look like when you throw this concept next to that concept, and does that make sense, and is that useful to think about, or is or not? And in a way, I think, I mean, Natalia and we were talking last night, so you said that the A.S.T process is very iterative, and I think it is. I mean, I think the way we work we sort of keep trying things out. So like these various projects we've done, it's like, we'll throw this together and see, what kind of sense does that make? And this makes sense and that doesn't. So we bring this forward, and then it's an evolving process. So almost like the projects that we do end up being these nodes in a process.
But in the exhibition itself, you do have like really key anchor points, right? So while all of these references seem like when you guys speak about it, about, sort of scrambled messages from the future, they're scrambled in a sense because you're seeing them at different speeds next to each other. But then you have this key anchor point, which is Antarctica, right? You have it at the front when you read the first sort of lines at the door that are an excerpt from a book by Jeff Godell. It's basically like, one little spark of a fire starts this, it moves into the jet stream, it melts the cap slowly, which then increase the water, and it seeps slowly and slowly, right? And that like one, 2 sentences reverberates inside of your head as you walk through and you're reading these images, you're seeing the Everglades and the water and the swamp. Then you get to the other side and you get to this wall drawing, right, which is visible from the street, and it has a really ominous message on it, right? It's just like, we are the ghosts that are screaming the reality that you only hear as a whisper. So I wonder if we can talk about the elements of this drawing, if we can talk about this ghost, right? It appears in a couple of your works in the past. What is the screaming? What is the whispering? And I know this links back to communication a bit. It's a big question. But I think it's really helpful to kind of see how that anchor point is both an anchor point in your continuous work, but here in this exhibition too.
This is me, isn't it?
It's you. Yeah. You're the ghost.
All right. Yeah, the ghost sort of haunts the practice, like more broadly, I think. And I mean, I think the ghost is this future voice that's communicating back to us, saying, it's coming through. Its message isn't clear coming through, and we've got to make some sense of it. So that's our ghost, I think, is this future voice that haunts us, that we can't quite hear clearly, even if it is screaming from underwater. And I mean, with the I said to Natalia, I was like, I don't know if I want to talk about the drawing, because in a way, like I'm trying. The drawing is is very iterative. It's like trying to understand this stuff, and it is literally this process. I mean, it's literally that picturing of what I just described, of like throwing all these things on top of each other and trying to understand where the links are and what makes sense.
So when you go into the space a drawing is around, and I think, what is it exactly? I think that's important.
It's a few things literally thrown on top of each other. So it's Antarctica, a map. It's the text. It's a thing called an amplituhedron, which I don't know enough about to speak well, but it's from physics and links. I think it's an attempt to link like quantum field theory and relativity. I'm going on record as saying that, and I don't know if that's right. But it's something I'm very interested in. So in a way, this is the thing. I don't know enough about this stuff to speak about it, but I use the drawing as a way to understand it better. So there's that within that, and then also the references to Xenakis. So the Xenakis is the sound in the video, but then also he was an architect and did lots of drawings. So he sort of did this series of drawings that has these sort of arcs. Which I think there's one in the slide presentation that sort of, and I think that drawing was from when he did work with Corbusier, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But he was an architect and a musician, and he did these series of drawings that sort of made these sort of arcing fields, and I think there was something about the way these sort of fields sat together and overlapped and sort of made these points where things sort of twist and arc, and I think there was something about how he was structuring space that seemed to link into this stuff, and this is why I'm reluctant to talk about it, because I'm not entirely sure how yet, and I feel like this is the early. I've only just started working with these images, but I feel like there's something to it that I want to explore more. So this is an early iteration of what I imagine will be a series of drawings playing with these geometries, both from Xenakis and from physics, and from matte cartography, and sort of seeing where they fit together.
On this, actually, what's really the importance of, this goes back to the space really quickly, just something I remembered, that you guys had mentioned at the very beginning, was the importance of people kind of sitting out and being able to see the city as well. And with the mirror, like with the wall drawing there, I was wondering kind of what's that perspective about specifically there in that hole, which is a very shaped kind of view.
I think the space itself is actually an interesting space just as it exists. So, I mean, you walk in and it's very low, and then all of a sudden you've got this sort of, I don't know, it's almost like this navigational interface to the city, which is interesting. So I think that when we're developing the architecture, we wanted to amplify that in a way. But I think piggybacking onto, I mean, what Diane's kind of getting at, this idea, I think, of scale is interesting. I mean, it's something actually I do think is a common theme also in the practice, which is to say that, it's not an individual practice, right? We're actually for people. But and in that, we can kind of look at art practice as something that deals with everything down to the individual organism, to something quite cosmological, actually. And I think that the space kind of does that, where the control room actually is quite this kind of interface that's you and the buttons and the visuals and sort of culling through data. And then it's you and the city and kind of understanding that dynamic as well and that interface. So I think that, the struggles, I guess if you want to call it, in a positive way, I think you're trying to articulate a practice that deals with it. And this is beyond the issue of climate change, but I think climate change becomes this kind of reality test, if you want to call it that, if you want to call it, affords us a kind of necessity to deal with scale. So I think the space actually is a great microcosm of that, because it is quite kind of funneled in a very particular way in the entryway, and then completely opens up to the public. So to me, it was actually, I think we really took advantage of that.
I mean, I think the space does sort of do this thing of, you have to manage, but I mean, thinking about the immense amounts of data that come in, and the sort of this sort of completely inhuman scale, whilst still like dealing with the daily reality of being a human in it. So I mean, and I think the space actually does this. I mean, I think this sort of outward looking and then internal experiential summary or something, I guess, of the control room bit, and then sort of you guys did this outward facing thing, so it sort of has spatially, it does this sort of back and forth system.
And I think, like, even though we're thinking conceptually, even though we're thinking about it conceptually, sometimes it's just like the pragmatics of, it's just a really nice space, like that gallery, and it would have been a shame to block it out. So I think that was like also a motivating force for, let's make a space that works outside as well as inside.
Thinking about A.S.T. maybe a little bit broader, like in a bigger way, and about this exhibition, all of these different elements. What's the takeaway? Kind of, what are the broader narratives that you guys, or the messages that you guys are creating with this? I mean, now that you've had about 5 minutes to look through the work that you've just finished.
I always feel like with that question, I want to turn it around, because in a way, I feel like we're the least appropriate people to ask what the takeaway is.
But A.S.T. has a desire to create narratives, right? I mean, this idea of even throwing messages into the future and right back. No?
Yeah.
Ha.
All right.
Do it, Diane. You got this.
I mean, I think. Oh.
There's multiple takeaways, so remember, maybe we can describe like maybe one of the narratives, or the idea of creating multiple narratives rather than one.
I mean, I think that's an essential part of it,
Yeah.
is trying to manage living in. I mean, and this ties back to the title, the intertidal thing, living in this sort of zone of, what is it? Is it whose was the phrase, the deep uncertainty? It's like
Obeys.
Yeah, Jayantha Obey, who we spoke to in this event at BFI, is a climate modeler and was speaking about deep uncertainty, and it sort of seems like that seems to really describe where we're at and where we have to sort of learn to live. So I mean, I think one of the narratives would be that there isn't a narrative. Like it's no longer, we don't live in a place where that's satisfactory or even desirable, because it would just be like fantasy. I mean, if you want fantasy, that's one thing, but like if you actually want to contend with the realities of where we're at, that's there needs to be a getting comfortable with this deep uncertainty, with this sort of living in between things, with this sort of not having grand narratives to hang on to.
Even contending with those issues means a different kind of scaling for the collective itself, no? So like how does the collective think of itself in terms of scaling up or scaling wide in order to contend with that? Have you guys thought about that?
I mean,
I know
we've touched on it, but I mean, we kind of feel that we do want to actually have those forthcoming steps. Where do we go from here? And this goes back to the issue of like, what is the role of art more generally? What is the role of an art practice? I mean, it was interesting with the engineers, because they're like really, I think, hedging and saying, do more. And I think that, so the takeaway is I think, not just for me a narrative takeaway. I don't think it's just about a kind of culling through, the creation of narrative per se. I think that for me is part of it. But I also think it's about what is scaling up as a practice mean, and what do you do? So, I mean, to me, that's a really interesting question, in addition to the things that we are already doing. And I think it relates. I don't think it's one versus the other. But, I think that as we're all sort of getting at here, we're living in a time that things are changing, whether we want them to or we don't. So I think that the narratives, Patty, that you're kind of getting at is, I think that there are certain amplified things that can come into the fray, like the ghost can actually. I mean, I think about this idea like when you watch like ghost stories, right? That the ghosts always have a story to tell, and they want you to know what that is. That when they appear, they're always wanting you to know, almost like forewarning you or giving you a heads up. And I feel like defining what those messages are, those whispers that are actually screams, I think is a good place to start. As sort of strange as that sounds, what are those messages, and what do you do once you have them in a way? I know I'm going from really practical to really kind of abstract, but I think it's complete understanding of where we're at in terms of saying we're not going to fight that, but then also trying to carve trajectories through it. And I know that's an abstract answer, but for me, if you guys...
I think it's a question for like what... I mean, I think one of the things we're trying to do too is like understand what an art practice is that's commensurate to these conditions. Like what does an art look like that's up to the task? Because things feel like they have shifted or are shifting, and so therefore I think what art is and does also needs to do that. And in a way, I think that's for me, that's like very much at core as to what we're up to as a collective, as a collective practice, is like trying to understand what that is by just going at it.
It's your turn. Oh yeah, we've got one in the back.
Hi, ladies. Thank you. My name is for me, to be honest, I was at the last gathering you had, which was extremely highbrow from where I was sitting. Today, what I saw, and congratulations on the exhibit, really landed it for me. And I come back to this point of art as a catalyst. It feels to me like you've almost set off an alarm beacon in there, that started to flash. And I do think that what you're doing is very relevant, and it's relevant in the public space. I agree with the officials that suggested that you are the catalyst to that communication. And I would encourage you to explore ways that you might move the beacon around, if you will. I'm curious as to the ghost and the voice from the future, if it's a voice of admonition or if it's a voice of direction.
I mean, I think the reality is it's lots of voices. It's the noise, right? I mean, I think the text within the video sort of creates a somewhat singular voice, like it's sort of speaking as a singular voice. But I think the point of it is more that it's lots of voices, and trying to, we're left in this position of trying to construct a narrative that's solid enough to hang on to build a future with, but because it's noise, it keeps shifting and changing, and that's just what we have to build with. I mean, that's the narrative that it's this sort of like ephemeral narrative that we can't quite hang on to, is sort of all we get. So it's not really, I mean, who knows, right? Because it's coming through as noise. So we've got to sort of pick out what we can from it and use that as a basis to construct a future.
Anyone else? Yeah. Oh, got a few. One here.
I think it's interesting, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, that we live in a world where there are facts available, and science has kind of already described what you're talking about, but people are turning a blind eye to it. I'd like to hear more about, your view of how maybe art can succeed where science has failed, and is that kind of scaring people? into realities of what the facts show, or is it another approach?
I think it's working side by side. I don't think it's one, like, you can't lose one without the other. And I don't know if I see it as science has failed. I think there's multiple studies, right? You know, depending on who's generating those studies, who's funding those studies. So there's multiple points of view, and that's, I think, what makes bringing it back to Miami, what makes Miami quite relevant in the discussion is that it's actually happening, rather than something that's still very like, well, in the next 30 years this will happen. Well, it's like actually insurance companies are the first to support this type of study and to actually see it. Why? Because they're financially invested, and I'm sure they would have.
I just would hope that somewhere in there, but maybe this has to do with the ghost too, that the ghost is also maybe speaking with compassion, and maybe that there's a way that we can, that it's taking us by the hand, you know, as opposed to just scaring us and alarming us and or telling us what we've done wrong. That there's this also that as well.
Yeah, I mean
guide us.
the
Yeah.
screaming isn't just like berating.
Right.
But
It's
yesterday, Ali, you mentioned something, because we kind of touched on this in casual conversation yesterday, and you said that there were other ways of talking about all of these things that weren't just through data, right? And that there was something very specific about art. And really, that kind of stuck to me, because maybe it's a language thing, which I don't, I think it kind of goes into a bit, but there's just a different way of both affectively feeling it.
It's the
Yeah.
image, it's
Embodying
the
it,
generating
feeling
image.
it. Yeah.
Sorry. And then one there, I see you.
So many questions. So I think the one that actually came out at a similar panel discussion we had a couple of nights ago was, we talk about artists as a catalyst, as a way to, amplify the message. And I wonder if, because you've had a panel involving city officials and engineers and marine biologists, and how would you see as artists, as a collective, impacting policymaking? Is that an ambition? Is that a next step? Do you see openings where artists can actually have that role, which plays very much also into the residency of the artist in public life? So is that something that as artists and cultural producers can we actually do to have a real impact?
I mean, I think, yes, I think that can happen. They're interested. Okay. I mean, what it is, though, and how it's manifested, I think is a question. I think this goes to something last night, which is, the difference between art dealing with politics and art dealing with policy, which I think are two different things. But I think they see us as that interface between what they're doing and what the public knows about. And I do think that interface, which deals with this issue of communication, I think was one of the primary things that came out of that workshop. Because, I mean, in terms of science, I think, Patty, you were touching on it. Like, it depends on the science. Everybody can debate the science. But, I mean, the one thing about living here is I mean, because it's so tangible, you can't debate things that are actually happening. Water coming up from the ground can't. But I mean, I think that, yes, I mean, that goes to, I guess, where we might take the practice. But going back to Natalia, your kind of commentary about the affectedness of art, I mean, I think it's that kind of thing where if you walk into a space, and you kind of feel and understand, and it's acknowledged as actually a public or community experience, it's different than like getting stuck in your car and wading through water. So I think both of those things are important. I think that experience of art as a communal experience in understanding the noise and understanding the messages as public goes, I think is important. I don't think that's happened quite yet in terms of climate change. You just hear politicians say yes, no, yeah, maybe, no. But then the issue of policy, I think, is something else that's got her potential horizons, but we're not there yet.
I think it could be really interesting because, I mean, in a way, like I don't have background in government at all, so this is purely me just guessing as to how it works. But presumably, you base policy on what you understand conditions to be. And then that has to change as the conditions change. But it, you know, I think so much of what we've been talking about, and I think so much that we've been thinking about in relation to this is like, it's so hard to just be like, know what the conditions are. I mean, you know what they are I mean, the temporality of it too is really strange. Like, are we talking the conditions like this year? Are we talking the conditions in 10 years? Are we setting like building code for the next 50 years? Like, you know, so the temporality of this and how to construct policy, you know, in this sort of zone of known unknowns.
And then maybe to answer your question directly and briefly, I do believe that aesthetics and art and cultural practitioners can have a shift, but I also think what I had to do was look at the time. So in the sense of like, it's not going to change in a year, it's not going to change in 5 years, it's going to change in 20 years, you know, and it's just shifting cultural perception, which takes time. And I think that's important to understand. So,
well, also the temporality of politics, right?
Yeah.
Like 4-year election cycles, you've got to make 100-year decisions based on within the context of 4-year election cycles, which is, you know,
I see 3 questions in the audience, and I see 1, 2, and 3. So 1.
So hearing you talk about New York 2140, where you have this intertidal zone, it makes me immediately have a vision of a hotel with a sunroom that becomes like an aquarium room when the tide comes in. And I'm wondering if a collective like yours and other artists could also be trying to make a narrative of, well, let's embrace this coming reality in a creative and beautiful way to make life more interesting and to embrace nature's march, as it were.
Yes and no. I mean, in a way, because I think what comes to mind, like around work like this, is often you have like these visions of future cities that have this beautiful aqua, like water that you could like, you know, like Venice that you could swim in, like, or some picture of that, which sounds great. But I mean, the reality is it's going to be sewage, you know, and so in a way I think all of us get like really into engineering. None of us are actually engineers, but we all get really like unduly excited about it. So actually talking to engineers is really exciting, because they actually think through, okay, what do you do with the shit? Like, literally, like what happened? Like, how do you keep? Well, this is one of the things that came up during the BFI thing. Like, okay, we can maybe learn to live with water, but it's got to be moving water. It can't be stagnant water. So that's an engineering problem. And I think this is stuff that we're really interested in, each of us individually and as a collective, and I think will feed in. I don't know if we would.
I think it's because we're.
No, go ahead.
No, just to piggyback off on what you're saying, it's not so much. I think we're thinking about the systems of the impacts of climate change. So when we think of climate change, we're thinking about the sewage, and we're thinking about the floor levels, the bottoms of buildings, and we're thinking about then how do you fix that, or how do you change that? And so the idea of beautifying it is not something. It's just we're thinking about it, I think, from the bottom up in a way.
It's even like thinking about like, okay, well, if this is going to happen, what does the code need to be to make people do this thing? You know, like,
and how are they going to feel about it? Like, how are you going to get them to actually
do it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's as much sort of like trying to understand how people behave as much as actually making. I mean, because I don't think any of us really do like the sci-fi city thing. As much as I like that stuff and I have affection for that stuff, it's not really like what I do particularly. I mean, I wouldn't be against working with someone that does.
I'm going to break rules and take 2 more questions that I know have been waiting, even though I know I see my clock person being like. Gustavo?
Okay, so in terms of the role of artists in general, right, in society, it seems like your interaction with engineers and with the community at large, right, is being kind of, they look at what you're doing, or they probably interpret the function of the artist as a storyteller, right? Somebody that is capable of putting together certain ideas and communicating efficiently or legibly to the community, society. Put that aside for a moment. Your notion of the ghost, for instance, it's something that basically lives in the future and is talking to you from the future in order to warn you about things. I sort of started thinking about a person that I haven't heard mentioned yet, and his name is Al Gore, who came out, about 10 years ago with a fantastic movie that it didn't just explain these things in an artful way, but in a totally, scientific way as well. And yet, it failed to make the impact that we all expected. So, in that sense, what I see is, society's yet to learn how these dynamics between people that do different things actually come together. I applaud you for trying to, to occupy that space, because I think that's something I'm not really that. I admire too many people like Mr. Fuller, and I don't feel like I'm that way. So, people who, really make their work about understanding things. I'm trying to understand only one aspect of what I know, and I'm frustrated by not being able to do it correctly. So, my question, I don't know if that comes out across as a question, but what are your expectations of this, this work?
Well, I think this goes back to one of the things we were talking about before. Like, I actually don't know if art's job is to communicate clearly and efficiently. I think that's journalism.
Yeah, that's what people expect you to do, though.
Yeah, but I don't actually think that is what we do. Whereas, I'm all for art as propaganda, and I'm totally on board with that as an aspect of it. But it's to be effective as propaganda, it can't just be journalism, because the journalism is something else, and it's important. And I think like communicating good science is hugely important, and I do not by any means devalue that at all. But I think art does something else, and I think it is about like materialized thinking. Really, like thinking through the process of thinking through what to do in the face of this sort of made material, so a dialogue can happen. I think it probably does that more than because I don't know that anything in there conveys a message clearly. I don't know that that's really our ambition either. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
In the same way that Al Gore's movie.
No, I don't. It's not really the intention. Yeah, and I'm not against didactics either. Like, I'm very happy for part of it to be like, this is what we're talking about. This is happening. I'm all for having didactic elements within work, but I think it's something very different than a journalistic documentation of a condition. It's more sort of being immersed and immersing someone in a condition to try and better understand it, I think. Not necessarily like understand it in a way that you like read a newspaper and you understand, okay, this, then this, then this, and this is how it fits together, but more broadly.
It's more like generating more intuition about it.
On that,
I wouldn't want to admit that, but yeah.
yeah. I'm going to take that very last question.
Which one was the piece of research that you read that made the most impact to you personally, and why?
Each of us?
There's so many.
So many. God,
It's like a big blend
Yeah.
of things, from journalism to science fiction
Mm-hmm.
to just TV to weird videos of
Yeah. Are we gonna
fluid
have the,
dynamics.
Are we gonna have the bookshelf? Yeah, there will be.
Oh, there will
it's
be
not. It's in there yet. No. There will be books in the front, and like the part that looks out over Lincoln Road. There'll be like a series of books that we've been looking at and are interested in, and had an impact on us.
On the part that you can't sit on, it says, "Please do not sit." There'll be a line of books there.
A little mini library.
To distract you from sitting there.
I think that question's interesting because we actually work in the opposite fashion. You know, we never sort of work in that way where like, what's our inspiration per se? Like it's always a sort of amalgamation of these systems, and what are their correlations? I mean, not in an uber cybernetic way, but I mean there's definitely this idea of somewhat of a correlation, but we're threading, so many things. Yeah.
But I also think that when you go to a museum or any place where you're exposed to many things, sometimes something sticks with you and stays with you, even though what you're creating is a collage of many things. So I was asking if that happened and what was it in terms of.
It's more of like a research project.
Well,
It's like making an essay, I think. Like if you're writing an essay, you have like an annotated bibliography. And I think it's more like that rather than some one specific. It's an amalgamation of different themes, ranging from like cybernetics, climate change meets post-human, meets new materialism, meets certain film, science fiction and film genres and literature, and each of us have our own personal kind of stake in all these things, but they intersect in many ways, and we talk and we communicate once a week at 8 a.m.
Every Monday.
Every Monday at 8 a.m. Yeah, that's true.
So if I can welcome all of you guys to the gallery, we can casually continue there. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.